What can a 5,000-year-old story show us about weaponizing narrative? Is history being rewritten all around us? And how are the very neural pathways in our minds being molded by fantasies like the Jussie Smollet hate hoax? All this and a lot more on today's edition of The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose. I'm Mark Angelides for LibertyNation.com. Welcome to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose. I want to talk to you about storytelling and narrative, its power, its dangers, and most importantly, its weaponization. Just a couple of months into 2019, and already the two biggest stories, or narratives, have collapsed. Jussie Smollet's supposed MAGA attack and the Covington kids debacle. But we have to consider that the damage has already been done. You see, stories aren't just fleeting entertainment. They shape the way we view the world, which in turn shapes our actions, and in a cycle come back to reinforce our view. That the narrative turns out to be a myth doesn't change the fact that we've now sculpted brand new neural pathways. Today we're going to talk about the importance of narratives, how politics can be shaped by stories, how demented demagogues are literally rewriting your brain through stories to solidify their own power, and hopefully I can inspire you to dig out some of the truly classic literature that belongs to the entire human race. The oldest traceable story we have today is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's this semi-mythical tale about a Mesopotamian king. We have these tablets written in cuneiform. And you know what, the story is fantastic, and as important today as it was over 4,000 years ago when it was first written down. But the oral tradition is even older than that. You see, there was a real King Gilgamesh, and he lived between 500 and 800 years before these tablets were even made. That means that his story, in one form or another, endured through centuries, with nothing more than word of mouth. Why? Because it's important. I'll give you the quick version. So we have this mighty king, and he's pretty much a tyrant, he's a bad guy, until he's challenged by Enkidu, who was raised by animals. They fight and eventually they become the best of friends. It's through this friendship that Gilgamesh becomes a better person and a better king. And one day his best friend dies. He's crushed. Now, he's not just crushed because he lost his best friend, a topic we'll talk about later, but because he realizes his own mortality. Remember, he's the king. The adverse aspects of life, they've been shielded from him. Not the war side, sure, but his enemies don't matter to him, presumably. But the daily struggle that comes with getting over the death of a loved one, it rocks him hard. He's only now scared of actual death. And as folk in tales often do, he sets off on a quest. It's a quest to find immortality. Here's the interesting thing about quests, by the way. They still happen in today's stories. They even happen in our day-to-day lives. Not on the scale of the great epics of history. Our adventures, for most of us, are small scale. Maybe we look for a new job, we seek out a romance, or perhaps like Odysseus, we face challenges to reignite love with the long-term spouse, maybe even fending off Penelope's new suitors. Or we have our run-ins with injustice, where we have to challenge the state or the status quo. Usually in a small court setting, but these are nonetheless quests, and each is filled with its own drama and tragedy. Of course, for the mighty Gilgamesh, his quest had to be a little more epic. He sets off to find a guy called Utnapishtim. This is a man who, when the gods got together and decided to wipe out the human race in a flood, he built a boat for his family and all of the animals. Does it sound familiar? Anyway, the gods, regretting what they'd done, they granted Utnapishtim eternal life, and Gilgamesh, he wants this too. After a lot of struggles, he catches up with Utnapishtim and asks for the secret. He's told, thanks to Utnapishtim's wife, that if he takes this special plant back to his home city, he'll be reborn or rejuvenated. But a snake or serpent steals the plant, takes it himself, and then sheds his skin and is reborn. And Gilgamesh ends up going home empty-handed. But you know what? He realizes that in a way he's immortal anyway, through the city that he's built and through the very humanity that lives in it. He realizes that eternal life isn't just about the individual, but it's about the species continuing. Now have a think about the themes of this story. We have the precursor to the Noah's Ark story, and we have the serpent, which, it's basically every story rolled into one, and it's endured for millennia. But what if the story was hijacked along the way? This is the story of all humanity and all history. What if despots hijacked the story and twisted it for personal gain? Would it still be pervasive? Probably, but at what cost? The story of history is still being written every day. Every event helps shape the narrative of what we see and perceive. When the story is twisted, it affects the moral and morality behind the story. It affects the moral and morality of the species. Why did the Gilgamesh story survive so long? Well, it's a great story full of action, adventure, emotion, and all that. But how did it survive hundreds of years as a tale passed mouth to ear, and then another 4,000 years in various forms? It's because the stories shape us. They shape the human mind in a way that literally nothing else in the history of existence ever has. When we're kids, we learn stories as a way of shaping our minds. Instead of the concerned parent stating, quite bluntly, it's more important that you're a beautiful inside than your exterior appearance. Kids aren't going to go with this. They won't understand it. They won't adopt it as part of them. But when we tell it them through the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, it makes a lot more sense. And then what about when we're being taught that all people have an inherent decency, and as such we should treat others as though they were our neighbours? A difficult concept to grasp, again, especially for children. So we're told the story of the Good Samaritan, and it all makes sense. These stories, and thousands of others, they teach us about our morality, our mortality even, how we should interact in the world and how we should treat others. And it's all done in a way that is accessible. And it's easy for a child to not only understand it, but to take it on board and live the lessons that they're being shown. When we destroy the truth of stories, the moral truth, we destroy the next generation's ability to learn from it. And you might argue that these are just fictional stories with a hint of historical realism thrown in. But that ignores how we relate to history from one generation to the next. In history class or in history books, unless you have, of course, an incredibly bad teacher, the events of history will be recounted to you as a tale. Not a fictional tale, but a tale nonetheless. Now, when children learn about World War II and the evils of Adolf Hitler, they aren't presented with a list of dates, locations, names. The tale, it's weaved together to show the motivations of the main characters, the horror of the events that took place, the struggles and the battles. It's not a disinterested laundry list. It's a living story that warns us of the horrors and the destruction that can be created through hatred. And again, we come back to the idea that powerful forces are trying to reshape and hijack these stories. Just look at the Holocaust deniers or the modern-day Nazis that still praise the work of the Third Reich. If they were one step closer to power, the next generation might not learn these lessons, might not learn these stories even. And what of today? What of the first few months of 2019? Are we setting up the next generation, and all generations to come, with the stories that will help shape their moral values? Or are we leading them down a path of lies, which, whether the people behind it know it or not, will teach a moral that is actually wrong? Let's think about the Covington MAGA hat-wearing kids that took up so much airtime this year. What story was being painted about them? And most importantly, what moral values did we learn? Well, we learned that, and I quote here, "There's something aggressive about standing there, standing your ground." End quote. That's from NBC host Savannah Guthrie. She's a news television host, essentially a storyteller of our age, and she's crafting a narrative that if you stand your ground in the face of hostile aggression, then you are the aggressor. How often do we teach children about bullying and standing up to bullies? These are important values to teach. Guthrie here, she's saying that the child is at fault for standing up to a bully. What kind of a world would it be where bullies are classed as victims and victims are classed as aggressors? This is exactly what happens when you play with the narrative of human history. It creates ripples and unintended consequences that no one can fully grasp or foresee. And how about the Jussie Smollet hate crime story? A mass movement of social media, politicians, presidential hopefuls all piled in to defend Smollett and denounce the MAGA fans across the country as, I don't know, homophobes, racists, bigots, and basically just scum of the earth, the pure scum of the earth. But wait, it turns out that Smollett has paid his friends to attack him. This is for personal gain and to demonize white Trump supporters. Too late, damage done. The media attention, and therefore the writing of present history, has been far larger to the initial hoax than to the subsequent exposing of the lie. Which is going to make it into the historic narrative? Which moral will be shaping future generations? More importantly, which lessons, handed down through thousands of years of storytelling, are being erased? Well, firstly, it now seems that believing stories without question is not only the done thing, it's also a great way to attach your name and gain fame and social points. There's also the idea that we don't need evidence because a trial by the masses in all their righteous anger and glory is clearly better. These are dangerous things. You see, it won't really matter who writes the definitive story of our time, because in every etched pathway in the brain, we're already writing it. Every one of us. And it's the children, they're the ones scribbling away harder than anyone else. This is being engraved. When the great storyteller Mark Twain, he wrote, "A lie can travel halfway around the world, while the truth is putting on its shoes." He wasn't kidding. The pervasiveness of these lies is not only faster, it's more indelible, because it gets the loudest noise and the most coverage. History is like a tapestry. It's woven together of stories that instill the acceptable behaviors and morals to create a living thing. Us. Literally us. When forces seek to destroy the tapestry, it's us and all the generations to come that they're really seeking to destroy. And that right there is what begs the biggest of questions. Why are powerful forces trying to literally destroy us as a race that has a history? Is it being done on purpose? Or are there masses of idiot propaganda-hungry savants unknowingly tearing apart the human story just by pure chance? It's more likely that this is a purposeful act. And that purpose is to tear us from the womb of history, because it makes us weaker and more easy to control. It's no coincidence that we're being taught through modern retellings of our past that everything the human race has achieved has been built on oppression. Those who seek ultimate power can only do so by destroying our ties to the grand legend that is humanity. Forewarned is forearmed, my friends. Embrace history. Embrace the stories and the legends, because knowledge, especially knowledge of ourselves, that really is power. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this trek down the rabbit hole. I'm Mark Angelides for Liberty Nation. Join us next time on The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose. We'll be looking at the story of Romulus and Remus, how the founding of the Roman Empire was based on a story, what it meant for the Romans to think that they were the descendants of the great god Mars, and most importantly, what this means for us, as poor mortals whose nations, if we're to believe the narrative, are based on little more than subjugation of our fellow man. Are we heading for our own fall of an empire? And what can we do to stop it?